Welcome to Common Sense. The Common Sense program is a series of shows featuring interviews with interesting people so that we can learn in a clear, concise, and direct way who these folks are, what they do, and what makes sense to them and what doesn't. I'm Rudy Breglia, and today I'll be interviewing the accomplished, wise, and authentic Ohio Treasurer Robert Sprague, and now candidate for Ohio Secretary of State. Robert, welcome to Common Sense, and thanks for your service. Why don't you start us off by telling us where you were born and where you've lived and what brings you to Ohio?
Yeah, well, I was born in Ohio.
Okay.
And I've got several ancestors that were born in Ohio. Matter of
Wow.
fact, yeah, we know that.
You go back a
Well,
ways.
William Davis and Margaret Lafferty Davis came across on a covered wagon in 1834. And so we know that that side of our family was here very early, but I was born in 1973 in Findlay, Ohio. And I went to school there, did grade school there, high school. Then I went away to North Carolina to Duke University.
Okay.
For my undergrad work. I was a mechanical engineer there.
Okay.
And then I had a job interview with a partner from Ernst & Young down in Atlanta.
Okay.
And the partner came on campus, and there were some other people that were interviewing, and one of them suggested, they said, Robert, you should go to the job interview. I said, well, okay. So I went to the job interview, and the partner offered me a job. And I said something that you never want to say in a job interview. I said, well, I don't know why you want me. I'm an engineer. Okay.
Okay.
And he said, well, Robert, he said, Duke's been teaching you how to solve engineering problems. I just want you to come and solve complex business problems. I said, okay. So I went down to Atlanta, Georgia, worked for Ernst & Young for several years. Went overseas to Hong Kong and Singapore.
Okay.
My job was to install accounting systems at some of the largest companies in the world. And after I got done with that, I started my own firm, and we installed accounting systems in middle market companies where we were fighting fraud and making sure that the books reconciled. And I eventually went back and got my MBA from the University of North Carolina and made my way back to Findlay with my wife Amanda, and we had 5 children.
Well, bless you.
Over the last 20 years there, so 25 years.
Okay. Why did you choose a public service career? Did you have a role model?
I did. My grandmother really instilled in me a deep love for my country, my grandmother Cole.
Wow.
Yeah, and so we would take family vacations to Williamsburg, and we'd go to the House of Burgesses, and she made sure that I knew about my family background and the sacrifices that everyone made for this great nation and also for our community where we lived. And so that's, I think, one of my interests in it. My grandfather was in the Court of Appeals.
Okay.
And he always felt like he was creating the rule of law for the state of Ohio.
I see.
And I loved him dearly. He was a brilliant man, and I really looked up to him as well. So those were kind of some of the reasons that I went into public service. But I remember in my private sector being overseas in Singapore, and we were working on a project.
Yeah.
And I remember realizing all of a sudden that I was very lonely and that I didn't want to be necessarily in Asia solving problems for these big companies. I really wanted to come back to my community and try to make my community better. And so that was the impetus for the long way for me to eventually get back to Findlay and to the state of Ohio.
Understand. What are the primary duties for an Ohio treasurer?
Well, they're multifold, but you could summarize them in that we invest, we protect, and we issue debt. Okay. So you invest the $25 billion portfolio.
Big responsibility, wow.
It is a big responsibility. We've got a fantastic trading desk, and I put our trading desk up against, it's fixed income, obviously.
Okay.
I put them up against anyone in the state of Ohio. They're very, very good. We also manage money for an LGIP, which is a local government investment pool.
Okay.
So all the local governments, whether we're sitting here at a library. The library could put money, extra money that they have, cash. The library could put money into the Star Ohio account, and we would invest it for them, and they
Okay.
could leverage our investment desk in that way. We access the capital markets as well for the state of Ohio. So just 2 weeks ago, we were in the bond market for over $300 million. And some of that was a refinancing, but most of it was new bonds that we were issuing from the state. We actually had a credit rating upgrade for the state of Ohio. Just maybe it's been 3 years now, but we now have, in some cases, a higher credit rating than the United States of America.
Well, wonderful.
We are AAA for some bond issuances, and so that's been we issue debt. We obviously and then we protect the taxpayers' money. And some of that protection is simply making sure that fraud does not occur, that people steal money from the Treasury, but also we act as the custodian for the 5 pension funds and make sure that the assets are what they say they are for the pension funds and for all the retirees in the state of Ohio that pay into those pensions. So we invest, we protect, and we issue debt, and we do a couple of other things too.
Okay. When you assumed the treasurer's office, did you discover any defective practices that you later were able to resolve?
I think anytime you take a new office, there's a desire to build up and do
Make it
things
better,
differently and make it better, improve things. I'll tell you, one of the things that we worked on a lot is the stable accounts. And so stable accounts are for individuals that have disabilities in the state of Ohio, and it allows them to work and live out in the community. And we have some family friends of ours who had a son who had an intellectual disability. And so I was very sensitive to this when I came into the office. And we started out, we had about 9,000 families that we served statewide. And we found that we had mothers that would go from one seminar and ask questions from our team, and then they would drive another county over and they go to the next seminar and ask the same question to see if they got the same answers from our team, because they didn't want to open an account that would put them at odds with the Medicaid system because they didn't want their son or daughter to lose medical coverage.
True.
And so we've been able to grow those accounts from about right around 7,000 to 9,000 when I came into office to over 52,000 families that we serve now. So that was something that we cleaned up, we spruced up, and we made work better for the people of the state of Ohio. And you can see the kind of the proof is in the pudding.
Okay. Why do you want to be Ohio's Secretary of State?
Well, I'll tell you. So I've spent years in the private sector fighting financial fraud. So when you're installing an accounting system, one of the first things a corporation wants to know, whether they're big or small, is how do you prevent somebody from writing checks that's unauthorized? How do we make sure that the books balance? And how do we make sure that our money is safe? And so for years and years, I fought financial fraud in the private sector. I just want to bring that proven leadership and that experience to fight voter fraud and make sure that our elections are held fairly and that they're secure. So, you can think of the Secretary of State's office as just the person that runs elections. But if you look all the way back to the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson wrote that prelude to the Declaration of Independence before they got to all the grievances against King George. And he wrote this most amazing, brilliant statement, which we're still trying to fashion our country to follow, which is, we hold these truths to be self-evident,
right,
that all men are created equal, that they are endowed with their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that governments are instituted among men to preserve such rights, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. And the Secretary of State's office is that fundamental piece of the Republic, the cornerstone of the Republic that transmits the will and the consent of the people to the government. And unless that office functions correctly and people believe that it's true and secure and fair and honest, we lose trust in the very foundation of our republic itself. And we lose our ability as people, whether it's at the local level, whether it's a library levy or township trustee race, or at the state level or at the national level. We lose the ability to control our government and to protect our rights. And that's fundamentally what the Secretary of State's office does. And it's not, should not, in my opinion, be a partisan office. It should be an office that calls balls and strikes. And we want to make sure that the elections are operated in the most fair way possible and in the most secure way possible.
Mm-hmm. What experiences best prepared you to be Secretary of State? You talked about a little bit.
I think that the experience of fighting fraud is very similar, because if you look at these other nations that we're competing with, this great powers competition with Russia and with China, you realize that there are billions of dollars that are at stake, in some cases trillions. And if they're willing to spend that much money in a trade disagreement with us, or to fight us on the battlefield, whether it's in using drones or whether it's using ballistic missiles that cost millions and billions of dollars, you have to think that these other nations, through our democracy, would also want to control our elections. And I think that this financial fraud fighting experience in the financial sector directly translates into how do you use three things: people, process, and technology, to work together to make sure that our elections are secure, and to work together to make sure that our elections are fair. And then I think the other big component of this is the Secretary of State's office is a big office. The budget over the biennium is over $100 million. And so the other thing that I bring to bear is my extensive experience in government as well, leading and being the administrator of the Treasurer's Office, which is also a big agency, also a deep agency with very serious responsibilities, and then an understanding of what it's like to work through and with the legislature and the General Assembly. So that brings, I bring all those skill sets to the table: my private sector leadership experience, my ability to manage a state agency, and then my understanding of how to get things done with and through the legislature are all assets that have prepared me for the Secretary of State's office.
What are the biggest risks and vulnerabilities in Ohio's elections? How would you address those risks and vulnerabilities?
Well, I think there's two sets of vulnerabilities. One is the vulnerabilities within the election system, and then I think the second is the belief of the vulnerabilities within the election system. And those you may think are two different things, but they're both very, very important. And I think when you're looking at risk within the election system, you have to start with the registration. So you always want to start with data, because if you get the data right up front and you get the registrations that are clean and true citizens of the United States, citizens and residents of the state of Ohio, over the age of 18, all those things in Article 5 of the Ohio Constitution. If we make sure up front that the registration database is good, then we don't have fraud on the back end.
Understand. Because
you have to kind of own a voter record in order to try to commit fraud in most cases. So if we get that registration process right up front, then we won't have the fraud on the back end. So the first thing I think we need to do is make sure that we have a process so that we can verify citizenship for each and every voter. And this is not, it's not anti-immigrant, it's not pro-immigrant, it's not anything. It's just upholding the rule of law in the state of Ohio. The Ohio Constitution in 2022, by the way, we all voted on this, to amend the Ohio Constitution to say that only American citizens can vote in Ohio elections. Now, this makes a lot of sense if you really think about it, because if I go over to France and I'm there, no matter how long I work there, they will not let me vote in a French election. Why? Because I'm not French, right? And not only that, but more importantly, I've sworn allegiance as a citizen of the United States to the United States. And so we want to make sure that the people who have applied for citizenship have sworn allegiance to the United States of America, and only the United States of America, are the ones that are able to vote. That is our social contract. And 77% of Ohio voters approved that in 2022. And by the way, nowadays you can't find 77% of Ohio voters, right? They can't hardly agree on anything. So We got to get the voter registrations right up front. We got to make sure that we have a way that people can prove citizenship as they register to vote. That's the first piece. The second piece is I want to create an internal audit team, much like we already have in the Treasurer's office, to look at the voter registration database. That way we can make sure, and we've got several instances or cases of this every year, where dead people end up voting in the state of Ohio.
True.
Now, dead people don't vote. What happens is they are sent a ballot through the mail, and typically son or daughter or brother or sister ends up voting that ballot illegally because they knew what mom would have wanted, or the dad had already signed the ballot and they were just sending it in, but it was after the date of death. So I want to create an internal audit team that looks at the voter registration database on a weekly basis to find out, all right, how can we make sure that the database is clean and that we only have valid people that are able to vote in our election system. And, people scream bloody murder, as if you're doing something wrong when the voter rolls are cleaned up. But in reality, you're only cleaning up people that are not allowed to vote, that don't meet the rule of law, that don't meet the criteria of the Constitution. And so that's one of the first things I want to do is I want to make sure that their registrations are valid.
Now, as far as citizenship, you can, the federal government should be helping you with that, right? Or is that not possible?
No, the federal government should and can, and most recently has started to help with that. And so what we need in order to be able to find out who is a citizen is we need access to some of these federal databases, the Social Security Administration database, so that we can take the last four of the Social Security number along with the birth date and see if that matches along with the name. We want to be able to, if you provide a driver's license ID, be able to go in and look at the driver's license database, because in many cases, as you know, when you apply for a driver's license, if you're a citizen, you have to provide a birth certificate or a passport or a consular proof of birth or something else in order to be here and get a driver's license. So they do have a lot of citizenship information. We need access to the systematic alien verification for entitlements database, also at the federal level, to see which individuals have applied for citizenship and then received citizenship into the United States. So access at the federal level to this data is critical to being able to show that someone is or is not an American citizen.
Understand. How many days of early in-person voting should Ohio have, and what changes would you enact?
Sure. Well, I like the idea of us going back to a voting system. Right now in the state of Ohio, if you show up in person, you have to show a photo ID. And 98.5% of the people that show a photo ID to vote, you know what they show? A driver's license number, right? They show everybody has a driver's license. Oh, not everybody, but 98.5% of the people, right? And for that other 1.5%, maybe you have to show a birth certificate or some other form of ID. But for the overwhelming number, it's a photo ID is a driver's license. Before 2005 in the state of Ohio, for the first 200 years of our existence, we showed up and we voted in person, right? I remember this as a kid.
Yeah.
Right? You showed up in person and you pulled the mechanical lever, right? Went with mom or dad. We all showed up at our local precinct, the church or the school, right? And,
so are our friends.
Right? But now we have this dual system that really bothers me. One is the set of mail-in ballots. Anyone can request an absentee ballot so they can vote mail-in, but they don't have to show any photo ID when they do that. They simply have to sign their signature to the ballot. Versus the people that show up in person show a photo ID. I would like to see us return to in-person voting. Now, your question was, well, should they do it on a single day of voting or should they have early voting? Now, the reality is a lot of people like to vote early. And I'm fine with that because as long as you're voting in person, you're showing a photo ID, I want to encourage that. I think that's good. What I would like to do is I'd like to see us declare Election Day a holiday. And Democrats and Republicans really like this idea. If you declare Election Day a holiday, then we could go back to in-person voting, and we could eliminate this no-fault absentee mail-in ballot voting that we're doing right now. We voted almost 1 million ballots in the general election in 2024 by mail in the state of Ohio. Now, you do have to send in a request to receive a ballot, so that is a good safeguard, and you have to sign that request. But it's still not as secure as voting in person.
True.
And what I would like to see is if we could declare Election Day a national holiday, we could go back to in-person voting in the state of Ohio where everyone shows their photo ID when they show up, and we reserve those precious mail-in ballots for the people who have valid excuses. Over the age of 62, you're a first responder, you're overseas military, you're convalescing, you are unable to make it to the polls, or you happen to be traveling and you can't make it. I think those are all valid excuses, but I'd like to see us go back to a system where we are voting in person and people are showing their photo ID.
Agree. Would you end the use of electronic vote casting machines in favor of restoring the 100% pre-printed, hand-markable, and countable paper ballots? And how would you bring this about in Ohio?
Well, I'll tell you, in the financial world, we use paper because paper provides an immutable audit trail. Now, we can use technology too, but we like the paper because we can go back and we can count the paper.
Yeah, right.
And I really like this idea of having a separate printed paper ballot where you can see who you voted for. Now, some people want to see them pre-numbered and watermark ballots, but the key is that it's a separate piece of paper that you can hold in your hand, and then you can submit to a secure ballot box that a Democrat and Republican have checked you in and made sure that you're part of that process. That way, we can go back and we can make sure that we count those ballots. We can go back and the day after the election and we can count all the ballots, and we can count the ballots and make sure that the machines are accurate and that they're telling us the truth. You don't need to fear technology, you just have to learn how to manage it. And that night, we should scan all of those ballots through a scanning machine, and they tabulate the vote. You know immediately who won, who lost, and how many votes were counted. That's transmitted to your local Board of Elections, and it's transmitted as well to the Secretary of State's office, and that night we know how many votes were cast and who won and who lost. Then the next day, you can send auditors out to go down and count the vote and make sure that the ballots and that the machines are 100% accurate. So I think from a financial perspective, that's the way you do a financial audit, and that's what I'd like to see us do to make sure that people have 100% confidence in the vote.
And I think you've answered this question. Could non-citizens ever be allowed to vote in Ohio?
Well, I think the issue is before January and February or after. And before the recent Senate bill or after. Because before, we had access to some of these federal databases just last year. You could have a scenario, and there were people, and they've been referred to prosecution, and there have been news articles about them, who were non-citizens that were registered to vote and then also voted in Ohio elections. Now, it's not a big number. It's a small number. However, every single one of those votes cancels out, potentially, a vote of an American citizen. And we don't want that. We won't allow that. Also, you also have to think is a person that wants to commit fraud, that does not have any honor, and they see a loophole or something that they can take advantage of, and you don't want someone to come in and commit massive fraud through those loopholes. That's why access to these federal databases is so important, and I hope we're going to have more of that in the future.
Okay. Do you support an outright ban on all third-party voter engagement groups conducting registration activities in Ohio?
Look, I think just everybody needs to follow the law, all right? And so if you follow the law, I'm fine with that. We certainly want people to be encouraged to register and vote.
Right.
Here's the problem, is that some of these groups, they go out and they pay people by the signature or by the person that they sign up, and they'll say, well, I pay you, I don't know what it is, pay you by the number of people that you sign up. Now, the issue is, in a lot of cases, these third-party groups are registering fraudulent records. So they'll submit records for people that don't exist. Now, sometimes it's funny because they'll put down Mickey Mouse and so on and so on, and you go, oh, well, it's not a big deal. But it is. Because if they're fraudulently able to register a fake voter, then they could potentially have voted that record. And we never want to see that. So, you have to follow the law. That's what I want to see.
Okay.
I want to see the law followed. And you should not be allowed to submit fake voter registrations to the state of Ohio. And so I'd like to see them do some more work on this. I'm fine with it as long as everybody follows the rules and follows the law. But in some cases, we know that they're not because there's a lot of fraudulent records that are being submitted as valid voter registrations.
Okay.
I think that it would be good for us to go back to, now, if you go down to the local board of election and you go to register to vote, you have to show your photo ID.
Yeah.
I think that would be a good rule for, as well, these third-party groups so that it's fair for everyone who's registering to vote.
Understand. What would you do differently than the current Secretary of State?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. Let me just talk, for instance, one of the things that I'd like to see us do, and I already talked about,
Right.
Which is our internal audit team and looking at the voter registration database
Yes.
on a daily basis. But, I'm a business guy and I come from the private sector. So one of the things the Secretary of State's office does is it registers new businesses in the state of Ohio. And we have one of the best and lowest cost registration processes in the United States of America. It's pretty phenomenal. It's pretty slick. And everybody likes it. Here's one thing I would do to augment it, is that we've got so many government programs, I can't even tell you how many, that will offer some financing or grants or lower interest rates or collateral support to new businesses that want to start in the state of Ohio. There's state level programs, there's local programs, there's federal programs. I'd love to see it when you register your new business in the state of Ohio, and I started my own business before. And let me tell you, the number one need for every single new business is money, is financing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, because you're starting out with nothing.
Yeah.
And you're wondering how you're going to make payroll or wondering how you're going to get through the rent next month. I've been there. I've lived that.
Okay.
I would love to see us create an artificial intelligence interface on the front end so that if you give us your criteria for your business, we automatically look through all of these different sectors and all of these government sites, and we present the best options for you to be able to get help in starting your new business in terms of financing.
Okay.
So financing needs for the business. And I think we may be able to even do some matching with private sector banks and other lenders through that website. So to be continued, but I think that's something that we could do to help small business flourish and get off the ground here in the state of Ohio.
It sounds like a great idea. Mm-hmm. Why do you think the public has lost confidence in the integrity of the elections process? And what would you do to try to reverse those feelings?
Well, I think that people have lost trust because you see some of the things that go on in some of the other states, and they infer those things for the state of Ohio. We don't do some of the, I think, over-the-top things that other states do. In Pennsylvania, during COVID, the Supreme Court allowed, hundreds of thousands of ballots to be counted after the date in which the General Assembly said was the end of the election. So I guess they get to run their own elections, but we didn't do that here in the state of Ohio. In the state of Georgia, they had hand counting through the night, and let me tell you, the hand counting is highly inaccurate. You don't want that. And you wake up the next morning and Trump has lost by 11,000 votes. It makes people very suspicious because they see all these ballots lying around and they know that there's no one watching the ballot and the chain of custody was lost. And then how do you know which one? Were there ballots added? We certainly hope not. And then, the piece with the sign off of the tapes and whatnot. Now, in Ohio, we do things a little bit differently than these other states, and then our elections are bipartisan in nature. And so in Ohio, we have a Democrat and a Republican that check you in to vote, that vote the ballots together, that make sure that the chain of custody is never violated for your vote or for your ballot, from the time when you cast the ballot to the time when it's counted later on that evening. And that competition between the two parties is really what gives us faith in the Ohio election system. And we do Ohio elections right. And so one of the things what I would do to restore trust in the integrity of the system is I'd like to see a secondary audit after the elections, not just for the accuracy of the count, but also for the bipartisanship of the process. So that we go back and we ask local boards of elections to show us how the elections were bipartisan and that both a Democrat and a Republican made sure that that chain of custody for your ballot was never broken.
Okay, well said. What voting statistics are the most valuable for voting integrity? What numbers?
We always want to look at the number of cases that are referred to prosecution, the amount of fraud that we have. And in Ohio, it's very, very low right now. And we want to keep it that way. But I think the other, and that should give us confidence in the Ohio elections that we're on the right path. Not that we can't do more, but that we're on the right path and that Ohio elections are solid and strong. But I think that the key component for election integrity in terms of statistics is you want to see how many people voted and you want to see what the fraud was, for how many people voted. And we're very fortunate in our state that that is very low right now. We want to make sure that that continues.
Who should be on the county board of elections?
Well, you want to have people that understand the election system is the main criteria. And that's the way our boards of elections are structured. We've got both parties that have an equal representation on the Board of Elections. And I think that for probably 80% of the votes, they see eye to eye on practically everything. It's that 20% that sometimes, they don't see eye to eye on. But in many cases, that's good because iron sharpens iron and it keeps everybody honest. And that way they follow the rules of the election. So I think the people that you want on the Board of Elections are people that are interested in elections, and you want to make sure that they're bipartisan.
What would you do to encourage businesses to move to Ohio and create employment?
Well, you look at our bond rating that's gone up, right? So obviously we're fiscally responsible, and that's a huge element. I think the other piece is, as I've been in the legislature, we have lowered the top marginal income tax rate now 7 times. And we are finally at a flat tax as a state. I believe the tax rate now is 2.75% for this next year. I could be wrong about that, so I'll have to double check that. But looking back at the legislation, that's what comes to mind. And when I was in the General Assembly, we lowered the income tax dramatically. And I think the number one thing you can do to encourage business to come here is make sure that we have highly skilled workers, that we have got a great educational system, and to make sure that people's taxes are not too high so that they can afford to raise a family here.
Okay. What is the Ohio Redistricting Commission, and would you recommend any changes in their activities?
The Ohio Redistricting Commission is, they draw the congressional districts.
Okay.
And as well as the legislative districts, although that's typically drawn by the state legislature. And so they draw the Ohio congressional districts. And, look, I think that the Redistricting Commission, a lot of people have been very critical of it, but it's an interesting process, which is that if they don't have the minority party's agreement, they have to redraw the districts again in a short amount of time, in a 4-year span. And interestingly enough, that's been enough to force compromise. And so the last congressional districts that were just drawn had unanimous support from the redistricting board. It's not an easy job, but when you have that kind of compromise, you don't see a whole lot of compromise taking place right now within our government.
True.
You have to wake up and you have to take notice and say, well, maybe there's an element of goodness to that process that both parties were able to unanimously agree on those districts.
Okay. I asked this question of all my interviewees. In summary, what makes sense to you and what doesn't? To summarize.
To summarize? Look, I think that our country would be I think that we would have a lot less disagreement if we all followed the law.
True.
And I think that the law, and not just the Constitution, but also the Ohio Revised Code, if we follow that and we remain true to that, that should be our North Star. And we wouldn't have a lot of these disagreements and, quite frankly, a lot of the problems that we now find ourselves in as a country if we followed the law in the first place. And we need to respect the different branches of government and make sure that the law is followed. And that's my intention as your next Secretary of State.
Okay. How are you campaigning now?
Well, you're doing a lot of interviews. Doing a lot of interviews and talking with voters across the state.
Okay. How can Ohioans help your campaign efforts? Do you need volunteers?
Sure, absolutely. We always welcome volunteers. You can go to www.spragueforohio.com and sign up as a volunteer there and see a little bit more about my platform.
Okay. How about your contact information? Email, phone?
It's on there. All the contact information is on the website.
Okay. Ohio residents should be grateful that someone of your character and qualifications has chosen to remain in public service. Thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Rudy. I appreciate that.
Okay. And thank you for watching. If you have any questions or comments, you can certainly send them to us. Use the emails that are at the bottom of the screen. Take a look at the website that the candidate mentioned. And that will also appear on the bottom of the screen. And if you want to appear on the show, or you know of an interesting person that would like to appear on the show, please send us that contact information and we'll take it from there. And remember, seatbelts save lives.